My stepfather and mother abandoned me and kicked me out of the house because their daughter got pregnant. Karma came for them. Just a year later, they showed up at my house, dressed in rags, begging me for every penny and any help. Hi, so I, 22 female, have had no contact with my mother for the past year, and she only reached out to me recently to ask me for help. All of this started last year after I had just graduated from college and was living at home looking for jobs. My parents are divorced and have been for the past 10 years. They had shared custody of me, so until I was 18, I was splitting my time between the two of them. My mother started dating my stepdad Sean about 6 years ago, and after 4 years of being together, Sean and his daughter moved in with us, and in a couple of months they got married. I didn't have any bad blood with either of them. We had a pretty normal relationship. Of course, I would only spend half the month for my mother's place, so I did not need to interact with them much anyway. Sean was nice enough to me, but with time I gradually realized that his daughter definitely did not like me. Kayla, my stepsister, was 2 years older than me and had this weird feeling about her, like she was truly convinced that she was somehow better than me. Every time I tried to interact with her, she would brush me off, so I stopped, since I was clearly not welcome to be her friend. And over the next few years, after she had moved in, she started making it more and more obvious that she did not like me. They were small things, but I always picked up on them, like the way she would roll her eyes at me all the time, or how she would make faces whenever I entered her room, and how she would start whispering on the phone every time I was around, and make it a point to glance at me occasionally and then giggle. These were petty mind games, but I tried not to let it get to me because it was not worth it. Also, there was nobody in the house that I could address this with because Sean doted on Kayla and treated her like a princess. She could do no wrong in his eyes, and I didn't want to bring it up with my mother because she would just tell me to suck it up and let it go. So I would usually just vent about this to my father, and he occasionally offered to speak to my mother or Sean about this. But I told him to let it go because it was just not worth them, and it would only make me seem petty and immature, since Kayla could just deny all of it. And it was my word against hers about my dad. I would say that I had always been closer to him as compared to my mother, but after I started college, I had been living with my mother and my stepdad on a permanent basis, more for practical reasons rather than emotional ones, because their house was in the city and it was closer to, well, everything. Whereas my dad had moved away after I had turned 18 to live in the suburbs because he wanted some peace and quiet. So after I started college, whenever I would come back home, I would go to my mother's place and I would meet my dad a couple of times before I had to go back. After I graduated, I moved in with my mother permanently, at least until I would be able to find a job and had saved enough money to be able to afford rent so I could have my own place. I didn't think anybody would have a problem with that since my mother certainly didn't. And for a couple of weeks everything was fine. But then Kayla announced that she was pregnant. She had been with her boyfriend for 2 years and they had decided to keep the baby. They had even made up their minds that they were going to get married after the baby was born. Everyone in the family was thrilled, most of all, Sean and even I. Congrats elated her. But 3 days after she told us about the pregnancy, my mother and Sean sat me down and told me that they would need me to vacate the house and move out. I was very confused because the baby wouldn't even be here for another 9 months, so I didn't understand why they felt the need to kick me out. But they said that after the baby was born, everyone would be too busy, and they wanted to get this done while they were still ahead. So I tried to negotiate with them. I told them that I needed a couple of months, and I was already in talks with the place, and as soon as I got a job and had saved some money, I would move out on my own, so they didn't need to worry about any of that. I was not here to live with them permanently, but Sean got really aggravated when I tried to negotiate with them and said that this was not something that he was willing to negotiate on. He told me that he and my mother had already talked about this, and they had come to a decision, so I had to just do it. And he told me that there was not enough room in the house, and they needed to make space for his real daughter and grandchild. And right now he could not accommodate my feelings, so I would just have to suck it up and leave. I found that very surprising and incredibly hurtful, because he basically just said that since I was not his biological daughter, he did not care about me, and my mother had sat there quietly, allowing him to say these things to me. I was getting kicked out of my house, and it felt bad. But after he said that to me and my mother did not even bother to take a stand for me, I decided to leave anyway. It was not much of a dilemma for me to think about where I would go next, because obviously I was going to head over to my dad's place. Anyway, I mentioned that he and I had always been close, so, and more importantly, he had always been there for me. As a matter of fact, he had been the one to pay for all my college expenses in full, and my mother had had no contribution to that. She had only been splitting the cost of raising me with my father until I turned 18. But after that, everything that I needed was covered by my father. After I got kicked out by Sean of my mother, I showed up at his house in the suburbs and told him everything that happened. He was furious, but there was nothing that we could do. So he told me that I was free to live with him for as long as I needed to. I could do that even after I got a job, and I was really grateful for it. So I stayed with him for a couple of months. I worked, and as soon as I had the money, I got an apartment of my own. My dad was there for me every step of the way, and even after I moved out, he would help me out with money occasionally. For the last couple of months, however, I've been completely independent. I have still kept in touch with my father, and we meet every weekend because he lives in the suburbs. I have to drive for more than an hour to get to his place, but it's totally worth it anyway. Neither my father nor I have had any contact with my mother, and nobody from our family has spoken to her after she kicked me out either, so we have had no idea what the two of them have been up to. I don't follow them on social media, so I had pretty much forgotten about all of them since I have been pretty busy for the past year. That was the case until a couple of days ago, which is when my mom and Sean's showed up at my apartment, and they were in really bad condition. The clothes that they were wearing were in tatters, and I wouldn't even refer to them as clothes at that point. They were pretty much just rags, and they looked like they hadn't showered or slept for days. And when I saw them through the peephole, I instantly decided that I was definitely not opening the door to this. It was a pathetic sight, and I knew that they were here to ask me for something, so I just decided to speak to them from inside the house and ask them why they were there. They requested me to open the door and at least invite them in, but I said that that was not going to happen. They would just have to tell me what they wanted from outside. And then my mother told me that they were in this condition because they had been homeless for the past couple of weeks, and now they had finally decided that they couldn't get by on their own anymore and needed to ask me for help. When they told me that they had been homeless for the past couple of weeks, I was quite taken aback because, from what I knew, my mother was the owner of the house that we used to live in previously. Her parents had bought it for her way earlier, and the name on the deed was hers. So I couldn't figure out how she had lost it until she explained to me that while Kayla was pregnant, she had manipulated her parents into transferring all of their assets to her, including the house. The reason that Sean and my mother had done this incredibly stupid thing was because apparently Kayla had told her that her boyfriend belonged to a pretty wealthy family, and his parents had had their reservations about whether Kayla was trying to baby-trap their son. So in order to prove them wrong, she and her boyfriend came up with this plan that they would show her in-laws that everything belongs to her anyway, and she had no reason to try and entice him into marrying her for money. It had taken a lot of convincing, but eventually Kayla had been able to wear my mom down, and she had transferred ownership of the house to Kayla instead. She had told her several times that it would not make a difference, because at the end of the day, all of them would still be living together, and my mother had been stupid enough to buy it anyway. A month ago, she got married to her boyfriend, and it was not as grand a wedding as they had expected, which was the first red flag for them, because if her in-laws were that well off, then why was the wedding not more extravagant than that? Because Kayla has said that Sean and my mother and her in-laws were going to split the wedding expenses, but from the arrangements, it just looked like only the money that Sean and my mother had given her for the wedding front was being used, since it fit into the $75,000 bracket, which didn't seem much considering the wealth that her in-laws supposedly had. But they did not talk about it because Kayla told Sean that she herself had wanted the wedding to be something small. And since her in-laws were paying for all of the post's wedding expenses, like the honeymoon tour, she did not think it was appropriate for them to question it, so they didn't say anything about it. But 2 weeks after the wedding, my mom and Sean came back home from a visit to a friend's place, only to see that all of the stuff had been packed away in boxes, and it was all lying outside on the porch when they came back home and rang the doorbell. Nobody even came to open the door for around 10 minutes. And then my mom tried to unlock the door with her keys, but realized that the lock had been changed. After that, Kayla and her boyfriend finally came to the door and told them that they had decided that they wanted the house to themselves since they were newlyweds and they needed privacy. And when my mother asked them why they couldn't afford to get an apartment or a house of their own, because from what she had been told, her in-laws were rich and could afford to buy a house for them. Both Sean and my mother were very upset, since Kayla had always said that all of them would be living together. And then she clarified that all of the things that she had said about her in-laws being rich and everything was just not true. It was something that she had come up with to manipulate Sean and my mother into transferring ownership of all their assets to her, and since the plan had succeeded, they had no need to keep them around, and she could finally quit her job and be a full-time stay-at-home mom, and her boyfriend could also start his own business, instead of slaving away at his corporate job. When and my mother found out about this deception, they were furious and tried to tell them to get out of their house. But since the name on the deed was now Kayla's, they couldn't even do anything about it since they had legally transferred all the assets to her without even thinking about the consequences. So they were left with no other option but to leave that day, and they stayed in a hotel for a couple of days. But after that, they couldn't exactly afford to stay there forever, so they started looking for apartments to move into. But the rent was way beyond their budget, since Sean and my mother had spent a considerable amount of money on the wedding, and they had never been the kind of people to particularly care about saving money for the future. This spells trouble for them, because a couple of months ago, both of them had quit their jobs to start their own business, and their main sales were on social media. But unfortunately, it had not taken off yet either. However, so far, they had not cared about saving money, and unfortunately their financial situation was less than ideal. They had never been well off enough to afford not caring, so after they moved out from their hotel room, they could either afford food and keep up with their business, or they could afford the rent of the places around them, which was sky high. For the last couple of weeks, they had been struggling about what to do and had been spending their nights in a nearby park, which was a popular spot for homeless people. And then a couple of days ago, they had seen me walking into my building and had decided that they were going to approach me and ask me for help. After hearing them out, I was really sorry for what they were going through, but I couldn't help them out. For starters, I could just afford the rent and I had not saved up enough money to help anybody out, so I could only give them my sympathy and nothing more. But when I said that, they started yelling at me from outside the door and said that I was being heartless. Eventually, they did leave. But my mother said that she had never expected me to turn my back on her after everything that she had done for me right from when I was a kid. And now, I feel super guilty. Aita, for telling my mom and stepdad that I can't help them out, even though they're homeless. Added, you guys were asking me why exactly my mom and Sean would not be able to afford the rent. And while usually in my city, landlords ask for at least 3 months of rent in advance before they allow you to sign the lease agreement, and my parents don't have that sort of money right now. They did speak to a couple of people who were renting out their apartments, and all of them had the same condition. They could either pay 3 months of rent up front, or they could leave. They tried to negotiate with them as well, saying that they would give them the money as soon as they had it. But for now, they could only afford to pay for 1 month. However, it did not work with anyone in my city. Rent is pretty expensive, so it's a big deal, and I can understand why they're struggling. Also, my mother and Sean have both always been huge spenders. She has never had to struggle with rent since her parents bought the house for her, but now she can't rely on them either, since both of them passed away a couple of years ago. And she's not really in touch with the rest of our family, so it will be very awkward to beg them for help. I don't know about Sean's family anyway. I can't say that I think this is unexpected because they were forced to let Kayla take over everything, and on top of that, they did not even seem to think that it was important for them to save money for their own future. Their business is not even doing well yet. They keep putting money into it at some point, which is just hopeless. It was a homemade jewelry business. My mother was handling the jewelry-making part, and Sean was handling the finances. It was a small business, but right now they don't even have a home, and they are running low on resources as well, so they can't continue with that either. Basically, they are screwed in every which way, and I'm their only hope. Update 1. Hey, it has been 9 days since my original post here. Most of you said that I shouldn't get back in touch with my parents, and I should just let them suffer because these are the consequences of their own actions and stupidity. I know that I get that, but I try to walk past that park. When I saw them just sitting there with hunched shoulders and no hope, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to look away and walk past them like it was nothing. And believe me, I tried. I really tried to ignore it for a couple of days, but eventually I just broke. So 4 days ago I went up to them and I told them that they could come with me to my apartment and freshen up. They could change into better clothes, at least my mother. Since I did not have any men's clothing for Sean, they seemed thrilled and couldn't stop thanking me. But I did not know what to say. It just happened before I could control myself anyway. I invited them into my apartment, let them freshen up, and my mother changed into my clothes, while Sean changed into a unisex t-shirt that I had and wore his own jeans. I asked him what happened to the rest of the clothes that they had, and they told me that they did not have the means to carry around the boxes that Taylor had packed for them since she had taken their car as well. So everything that they had was still packed carelessly in those boxes, and they were still lying on the porch of their old house. I told them to wait in my apartment while I made something for them to eat, because they had been surviving solely on canned food so far. And then I drove to my old house, and sure enough, Kayla had not even bothered to have them moved, and that infuriated me so much that I let my emotions get the better of me. And I rang the doorbell, and when Kayla opened it up to see me, she actually scoffed in my face and asked me if I was here to talk about our parents and what she had done. I told her that I wasn't actually there to talk about that, but I was just there to tell her that this is exactly the kind of thing that I would expect from somebody like her. I told her that she was a disgusting human being, and it was not surprising that she and her boyfriend had chosen to trick their way into taking over everything that our parents had worked for, because that's just the kind of person that she was. She did not have any talent or skills of her own, so of course she had to rely on manipulation. And at least that was one thing that she was good at. Then I told her that I hoped her child would do this same kind of crap with her at some point, because that would be real justice. And then I walked away with a couple of boxes while she cursed behind me. Anyway, after I had put the boxes in my trunk, since there are only a few and most of them were just clothes and other things that belonged to our parents, I drove back home, and then I gave them fresh clothes and everything else that belonged to them, and I told them that this was just a temporary measure. They were not supposed to make themselves at home here, but instead I wanted them to go back to their old jobs that they had quit a couple of months back and tell their employers that they wanted their jobs back. And as soon as they were back on their feet, I wanted them out of my apartment. I was also going to allow them to let them live with me for free. I told them that with the money that they had, I wanted them to split the rent and other expenses with me for as long as they were living here. I could tell that they wanted to protest, but I told them that they could either agree to my terms or I would kick them out from there as well, and then they really wouldn't have anywhere to go, so they decided to shut up and agreed to what I said. After my discussion with them, I called up my father immediately and I told him everything. I just really wanted somebody to validate my decision of taking them in, because I was not so sure about myself. I was worried about a lot of things, and so I needed to speak to him to calm down. But after talking to him, he told me that I had done the right thing. Maybe it was not right in the sense that they had screwed me over once a year ago, but now I was being the bigger person and helping them out. Because while I had survived because of my father, they had nobody else to count on. So this was quite different for them. And all things aside, it just showed the strength of my morals and ethics that I helped them out, even when they had turned their backs on me. After my dad told me that I had done the right thing, I did not feel worried about anything, and he told me that he would even send me money to help me out. But he did not want to speak to my mother or Sean because he personally did not like or trust them. Anyway, it has been a couple of days, and my mom and Sean have gone back to the previous employers to ask for their jobs back, and so far they have not received word. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed because the sooner they get their jobs back, the quicker they are out of my hair. Update too high. So 2 weeks ago, I had taken my mother in and allowed her and Sean to live in my apartment until they were back on their own feet. The good news is that they were able to get their jobs back, but the bad news is that they still haven't saved enough money. So they need to work this month for next month, and after they receive their salary, they will be moving out. Until then, we aren't going to be living together, but at least they have been very thankful. There has been a complete 180-degree change in their attitude towards me. If I compare it to last year, and my mother especially has been taking every opportunity to thank me for everything that I'm doing for them, they are also helping me out with all the household chores, making sure that I don't have to do anything, even though I have told them not to. Every time that I come back home from work, the house is spotless, and every single bit of work around the house is done. I don't want to get used to this kind of treatment because once they leave, I'm going to have to go back to doing this all on my own. But they keep telling me that after everything that I've done, this is just a very small way of repaying me. It's hard to hold the past against people when they are trying their best to fix it. And while I have not forgiven them completely, I'm trying to get used to this. My mother and I even had a conversation about this a couple of days ago while I was working on my laptop, and it was just the two of us and Sean was napping in the other room. She told me that she was really grateful to have me as her daughter because even though she had not been a good mother to me, I was still being an exceptional daughter to her, and she just had to thank her that I had turned out the way that I had. I didn't know what to say to that. She had tears in her eyes, so I just hugged her and said nothing. But that really made me feel like I was doing the right thing, because after I had posted my last update, several people had said that I had made a mistake and that I was being a fool for them, so they had lost all respect for me. But honestly, I'm not the kind of person who can just see people struggling and then walk away. I can't do it no matter how hard I try. So people might not agree with what I did, but I chose to be good anyway. Update 3. Hey, so my mother recently moved out with Sean. After they received their first salary, they started looking for new apartments, and luckily I was able to find one just a couple of blocks away. So they paid and signed the lease, and now they are sorted for at least the next 3 months. The last couple of weeks were good. I was able to reconnect with my mother. She apologized for everything, and we decided that we were going to try therapy to fix our relationship. She's not getting any younger, and neither am I. And I don't want to lose the relationship that I have with her, no matter how strained it is at the moment. I'm a generally forgiving person. I can't say that I have forgiven her and put everything in the past, but I want to have the option to do that so that we are going to look into therapists, and in a couple of weeks we'll start working on our relationship. I have also put them in touch with the lawyer so they can figure out a way to get everything back from Kayla, since they had obviously been manipulated and coerced into giving everything up and transferring the ownership of all their assets to her. And if there was some way to prove it, they would be in luck and maybe get at least certain things back. It's a long shot, but it's worth a try because I don't know why, but it just makes me so mad knowing that Kayla is going to get off scot-free, even after doing all of this. I don't want that for her at all, and I want her to be punished for everything that she has done. She is the true definition of pure evil. Anyway, I don't know if speaking to a lawyer and stuff will work or not, but my mother is willing to give it a try. Now that they have moved out, I'm back to living on my own. But I'm thinking about getting a roommate because it'll be easier to split all the household chores and rent with somebody else. Since this past month has been pretty easy for me, since I wasn't having to do all the work on my own, I've put up an ad, so I'm going to wait and see what happens. But for now, I'm on my own, and it's nice. I feel good doing that. My mother and Sean are doing better, and it's mostly just thanks to me because had it not been for my help, they probably still would have been homeless without any hope for the future. And I'm glad knowing that I had a part in securing their future. So as long as I have the satisfaction of knowing that I feel good about myself,